Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. The great panel set up to have a conversation about something I think is pretty interesting and unique as a conversation today. Um, I'm Doug Kincaid, Managing Director of Greenwald Research. This is a very special year for all of us at Greenwald as we celebrate our 40th anniversary, which you can see in the corner of our screen, kind of signaling it. One thing that's kind of funny about it, Matt Greenwald, if you've known him, has always tried to make a point to tell you to always celebrate and appreciate every birthday and maybe even half birthdays and not wait for milestones to come up for it. But I think we can be honest that 40 seems a lot better than 39. So we're kind of blowing it up this year and doing a whole host of webinars and have an in-person symposium event that's coming up in November. And as part of that, we have this series of webinars where we're kind of inviting clients and friends of Greenwald to talk about health and wealth, spanning retirement benefits and health, share their insights about relevant topics to clients that we have, but also people in the industry broadly. So be sure to visit our website at greenwaldresearch.com for updates on future events. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by a group of thought leaders, which we'll hear a little bit more in a minute, in the financial services industry. But instead of the normal routine of talking about specific financial topics and industry topics that relate to the research that we're doing, we're actually going to turn the spotlight on the actual craft itself and talk about thought leadership. So we'll explore what it means, what it takes to do it well, and kind of thinking about a kind of future lens on where it's headed, talk about kind of the future of thought leadership. So without further ado, joining me today, we have three very special guests. First is Kelsey Boas, who is the Retirement Savings Initiative Lead at the Aspen Institute Financial Security Program. She's a longtime advocate for a holistic, people-centered approach to wealth building. She works across the public and private sectors to develop retirement solutions that benefit all households. She's especially focused on increasing access, reducing friction, and raising awareness within the U.S. retirement system. And prior to joining Aspen, she spent a decade at BlackRock, where she helped design and scale retirement solutions that reached 40 million Americans, which is very impressive. Next, we have Kelsey Bradbury, who is Assistant Vice President of Market Intelligence and Thought Leadership at Lincoln Financial. Kelsey is the primary architect of Lincoln's Wellness at Work study and consumer sentiment tracker, which examines motivations and behaviors as consumers spend, save, invest, and plan for the future. Kelsey's recent areas of focus include Americans' concerns and priorities amidst the current economic climate, the connection between stress and finances, employers' experience designing employee benefits programs, and the challenges of planning and transitioning to retirement. It is a lot of things to be responsible for, Kelsey. And then last but not least, we have Joe Loparco. Joe is Vice President of Communications at Voya Financial, where he leads digital content strategy across the company's intranet, website, organic social media, and thought leadership platforms. He rejoined Voya in May of 2025 to help evolve and amplify the impact of earned and owned content in support of brand growth. And previously, Joe had served as VP and head of communications at Edelman Financial Engines. He also held roles at Cigna, The Hartford, Court TV, and I had to include this, Joe, the NBC News, where he was producing for Dateline NBC. So we have a amazing group of panelists here. We're going to go through this discussion about thought leadership. We'll leave time at the end for questions if you have them. So feel free to drop those in the Q&A section, and we'll pull those at the end to hopefully get a few of your questions answered from these experts. I'd like to start with kind of maybe an easy entry point. Maybe it's not an easy entry point, but it's a good intro to thinking about thought leadership is to talk about examples. So what is a piece of thought leadership that you've come across in your career that really stuck with you, and what made it memorable? maybe Casey, we could start with you to find out what's the thing that's always stuck with you as an example.
Sure. Thank you, Doug. And thanks for putting this together. This is sort of like the inception of Zoom webinars, thought leaders talking about thought leadership. Really excited to be here. Um, so my example has nothing to do with financial services, and it's a little bit more of a category than like a specific paper or anything. It's a podcast. It's shortwave on NPR, which is a science podcast. Um, the reason why it stuck with me is for a couple of reasons. One, it's about the latest in science, so it's got that sort of newsy appeal. It's bite-sized. They're 15-minute episodes, so I can listen to them on the way to work, no problem. So they've become a part of my daily habit and routine. And they're on a wide range of topics, whether it's health or space, or really any aspect of science, you name it. And because of that, they make these weird connections between things. And so it has this
Mhm.
air of discovery, which leads to sort of aha moments for the listener. And, for me, so much so that I find myself, coming home and talking about it with my family, and going to work and talking about what I learned with my colleagues. So it's got that sort of intellectual curiosity factor that I think is so sticky with thought leadership.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And I will probably get to a question later that has to do with innovation. And I think kind of thinking about connections between different industries or kind of entirely different kind of worlds of
Mm-hmm.
science and that kind of thing is a great way of kind of imagining new directions
Yeah.
for thought leadership in financial services or anything, as you said. So great. Appreciate it. Thanks for joining. How about Joe?
I'll echo Casey with a thanks for inviting me and putting this together. Also, congratulations on 40 years. That's quite a milestone. Um, so when I think about an example, I'm going to go back into my career a little bit and making the change from news. You mentioned my news background to the financial services industry and corporate communications. I I encountered and we had an opportunity to kind of come across the MIT Age Lab. And at first, I really wasn't aware of all the issues that were emerging at the time with longevity. And I just thought, wow, this was really an interesting area. It's kind of a white space that's being carved out. I hadn't heard of it before, but the topic was just becoming really popular and relevant. And I thought that the MIT Age Lab and the work that they were doing, there was the piece of research that I remember interacting with had to do with taking keys away from older Americans that couldn't drive anymore, and just the conversations that had to happen. And it really it opened my eyes up to all the different stories and nuances and issues that do take place within the broader kind of financial services category that are really compelling and interesting and human. And that's part of the interest too, is that these are issues that affect people in their everyday lives, and that it's more than just money and investing and insurance and portfolios and whatnot. It's about human matters, human issues. And so that group and that program was kind of memorable early on in my career.
Yeah, no, that's a great example, not just the research that they represented and the topics that they were exploring, but they've carved out kind of a real lane for themselves. And that's also part of what all of this looks like, I'm sure. Kelsey, what would you say is kind of the memorable example?
Yeah, so I'll also start out. Thank you for having me, and Joe and Casey. Very excited to hear your perspectives on all the things we're going to talk about today. Um, my example is also outside of the realm of financial services, pretty far outside. It's ketchup. So one of the first times that I learned about market research, like as a field, was learning about how Heinz had innovated the squeeze bottle. And they did it through ethnography. So I'm sure many of you know the story. It's definitely, like, since I first learned about it, I've heard it many times because it's definitely part of the Heinz lore. But they, everybody knew that and we've all experienced this too, right? Getting ketchup out of a glass bottle is, you have to stick the knife in there sometimes, and sometimes a ton comes out, sometimes a drip comes out. But uh, we all kind of took it for granted. This is just how ketchup bottles work. And then Heinz went into people's homes and they looked at how people were using their ketchup, and they had this aha moment of, the ketchup bottle could be better. People are struggling with their ketchup. Nobody's complaining about it, but like, they're all struggling with it.
Mhm.
And so what I like about that, it's not a traditional thought leadership, but because it's become part of their corporate lore, and because of the way that they talk about it, they're able to connect that aha moment, that piece of insight, to how they really care about the customer, and they bring that thread along. We learned this, so we did this. And we want to make your life better. Even though you weren't complaining about something, we saw it and we fixed it. And I just love that storyline. And I think it's such a powerful way to think about research in general, but also the thought leadership of it all is how you tell that story.
Yeah, that's a great example. And I think what I love about all three of these examples is how completely different this represents for kind of an entry point into memorable research, thought leadership research. And I think that's part of why this conversation is interesting. This can look very different if you are in different industries, but also if you are in the same industry and coming at it from kind of different lanes. And as well as within one company, different people in different roles have very different orientations to what thought leadership is, what it should be, what the goals are out of it. So glad that you had such distinct examples there, because it lends itself to kind of the first train of thought here of just taking a step back and trying to outline what we're talking about when we kind of say thought leadership research, maybe a little bit of a buzzword of how we describe kind of research that we do for different purposes. But when you think about thought leadership, so thought leadership is kind of represented in not only your bios and kind of your titles, but in how you describe a lot of kind of your type of research and work. What does it mean to you? What are the goals that you're trying to accomplish with it, and what makes that distinct from other types of research that that you see in the industry, or that your company is doing, or that maybe even you have a hand in? Joe, maybe we can start with you for this one.
It really is interesting because that term gets thrown around a lot, and I think everybody thinks they have an idea of what thought leadership is. And I'm sure my colleagues here on the panel probably have bumped into the challenge of, hey, we need to get thought leadership out there for our company or for a certain initiative. And you have to kind of pause and say, all right, well, what does that mean in terms of what are the goals? What's the audience that you're trying to reach, and what are you trying to do with it? It's one thing to, and I'm putting my communications and PR hat on because that's how I come at it. And I look at it as, oh, we want to get attention, we want to get visibility, we want to get out in the news. But if you're really doing this the right way, I believe that you're not only showcasing your expertise on a topic or a certain area, but you're, Kelsey mentioned this, you're actually getting action out of it. You're doing something with it. And that's where I think the real success is, if you can take the insights, take the knowledge and the expertise that you're getting, and then turn it into something that improves outcomes for your clients, advances the dialogue or the conversation in the industry on a specific topic, helps to solve a problem. That's really, I think, the secret formula for good thought leadership research. So I would say there's like three things that I probably would package into that formula. I would say it's forward thinking, forward looking, like you're thinking not only about what the issue is now or what you're dealing with the specific research agenda, but you're thinking about what does that mean in the future? Are you anticipating changes, trends? What's going to happen down the road? I would say number two, it's action oriented, so that it is actually addressing an issue, or you're thinking about a problem or a need that your clients or your customers have, and how that might impact the solutions and the offerings that you're giving to them. And then what I really do think is probably the biggest piece of the equation is it really different and unique? I mean, our industry is so cluttered. There's so much of the same going on and being researched. How do you do it in a way that it really does break through the sea of sameness? And so I think that differentiation and that uniqueness is, and it could be provocative. It might not be the most, kind of common perspective or point. It could be different and it could be counterintuitive, but it's in a position that will kind of break through that clutter. So that's kind of the three things I think about when I'm thinking about thought leadership research.
Right. Great.
I'll add to that. We like to think of our thought leadership as something that can help drive conversations and idea sharing. So it's more kind of educational in nature than some of the strategic research that we do that's more aligned to solving a specific problem or finding a path forward on a certain issue, which is something that I really love about it, because it's designed to be engaging and to be interesting and to teach people something new. And sometimes on our team, which is comprised of thought leadership, but also consultative research for the business, we hate when people say, "Oh, that's so interesting," because we want to hear what they want to do with it. But I think when I hear that's so interesting about thought leadership research, that's a win, because that shows engagement, as opposed to people just thinking kind of, "Oh, I already knew that, more of the same." So I love to, capture people's attention and help them think differently about whatever it is, whether it's, helping people save more for retirement or, whatever the topic.
I think we're super aligned on this one. And I think like maybe the connecting thread here is like, think of thought leadership as a verb instead of a noun, because it is about trying to drive engagement, education, changing the way people think, ultimately changing the action that they take. But it's very, very action oriented.
Yeah, I love that, Casey. And we had talked earlier about some of these topics, and you had mentioned that, and I have not been able to let it go because it really, I feel like, captures it. It could be that verb being convening people, right? And actually getting out there with the research, getting it in front of people, taking action. But I think, is Kelsey and Joe kind of alluded to, with kind of finding ways of having this stand out and have it be interesting and different to people, helps it change from just its content, right? It's just sitting there as content that you produced and spent a lot of effort to kind of create and craft. If it's not kind of having an impact on people, it's not getting into that verb status, right? I wonder, one thing, I might have blinders on for the industry, but I think that the financial services industry kind of gravitates more towards thinking about thought leadership research, or putting things in the bucket of thought leadership and kind of pointing it ahead, more so than other industries. I think it exists. Heinz is doing it, for example. But it really has like a connection in financial services. I wonder if any of you have thoughts about that. Kelsey, I don't know if there's a reason why financial services likes thought leadership, why it makes sense in financial services more than others.
I think it's that a lot of the business is B2B instead of B2C. So I think because we're helping other businesses make business decisions or improve their outcomes with the research that we're equipped to do, it's the perfect fit, because we can do the research about our end consumer and then share it with the intermediary consumer and they're getting a lot out of it. We're getting a lot out of it. Everybody's winning. And that attention and that interest is coming from the fact that they can take action based on it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Joe, your audio cut out for a second there. Still out. Casey, maybe we could toss it to you and well, Joe comes back.
Yeah, that's perfect. So I think I tend to think about there are sort of philosophical reasons for why this is, and there are practical reasons for why this is.
Mhm.
And on the philosophical side, I think it comes down to a lot of trust. And on the practical side, I think it's about differentiation. But if you think about like what we are asking of people in financial services, we're saying, give me your data, give me your money, give me your entire futures, please and thank you. Like that is a big, that's a big ask. That's a tall order. And thought leadership helps create credibility and helps build trust over time. It also helps build relationships over time, and that can be hugely helpful, like getting into more of the practical side of things in terms of differentiation. We're talking about very often long sales cycles, especially on the institutional side of things here. And, it helps cultivate that relationship over time. It also helps make products and ideas that are really intangible more tangible.
Mhm.
And, then when I think you super zoom out and you're talking about it sort of at the firm and brand level, if you want real policy and market change, and this is something that we think about a lot at the Aspen Institute, not surprisingly, like you need narrative leadership on that front in order to push things forward. And, it takes a long time, but that's by shaping the environment, you are in turn making your ideas and your products more valuable to that environment.
Yeah, that makes sense. Joe, can you?
Yeah, are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
Yep,
Yeah,
you're good.
and I was going to say, it's funny, Casey, you just said several words that were right in my head, with trust and credibility and the fact that we are in such a complicated, regulated industry. So
Mhm.
having research and bringing some of these things to life through that thought leadership research is a way that it does become a little bit more tangible. You can't try on a retirement portfolio. You can't test drive a target date fund. So how do you make these things come to life? You get educated and you learn about them through some of the research insights that we can create around these topics. And it makes your brand more credible and differentiated if you're doing it the right way and you're doing the things that we talked about before, which is breaking through and carving out some white space for your brand and developing a sense of authority on a topic. So it helps with that credibility factor in an industry that really is all about trust at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Yeah, part of this, I think, lends itself to trying to understand how you do this well, because this sounds like a tall order. These are kind of big picture, not easy wins with consumers that really can grasp things immediately and try it on in a dressing room, as you said. One of the kind of challenges related to it, I think, is that we're trying to be thought leaders, trying to kind of craft something that's informative, that has credibility, creates that kind of lane that you all are talking about. But there's a danger of kind of it lending itself to be too promotional. And I think that's one of the key conflicts that research in any industry that's kind of by the industry runs into. But thought leadership has a goal that is kind of counter to simple promotion and marketing and that kind of thing. And wondering how you all navigate that kind of challenge of trying to do all of this thought leadership kind of work in the right way, not getting too promotional about it. Kelsey, I don't know if you mind starting the conversation on that?
Sure. I think with that one, it kind of comes down to the questions that you're asking. So are they questions that are designed? I mean, they're going to be designed with the end in mind to some extent, right? And the end in mind being like we have a message that we want to reinforce, and something like a topic that we want to be covering. But when you're designing that questionnaire or your research methodology, you have the opportunity to say, okay, here's what we already know about this, and here's where we can dive deeper. Here's what might be interesting, and here's where we can really add value to the conversation. And I think if you're adding value to the conversation, you're not just reinforcing your products. Like those two things cannot exist exactly in the same frame, right? So you have to be able to, connect to what you want to talk about, that is your product set or whatever the message is that you're trying to get across. But in crafting the research plan and figuring out what the goals are, it's really important to be thoughtful about the topic, because that's going to define, oh yeah, this is more of the same, or this feels too salesy, versus that really truly engaging content that moves the needle.
Sure.
Yeah, I'd love to add to that real quick too, in terms of like even just getting tactical about the approach. So there is that end goal of like it has to be meaningful to the business. There has to be some connection that does advance your business goals, or in many cases that's connected to the research efforts. But if you put it through a lens of maybe like, is this newsworthy? Will somebody actually find this interesting? And beyond my business stakeholders, like, how can I spin this story? How can I create a narrative and a headline that actually will be something that gets attention and gets a reporter's interest? So to me, it's like reporters are very savvy about, they get like when they see a sales promotional type of a effort versus, hey, this is actually interesting and I can get eyeballs on this. I can sell it to my readership because there's something here that's interesting from a news perspective. And then the other part of that is putting it through the lens of customer centricity. Like, is this something good for the customer? Like, will it help a customer issue or a customer problem out, versus are we just doing this for a business reason to, promote our business growth? And so it just flips it a little bit with make it about the customer, and you have a better chance of making this seem less promotional and less about business and a marketing initiative.
Right. And maybe make it about the problems that those customers are facing.
That's right. Yeah.
Solutions can follow as needed, but the problem kind of helps guide it. How about Kelsey? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said, but and it's making me my mind is going to like the practical realities of like, if you are able to do that, it's because you have stakeholders that are bought in, and you have stakeholders across the company that are bought in and that are willing to sort of embrace like the longer term nature of these things, embrace the like those slightly wider aperture of exploration that's required so that you can find those interesting ideas. Like I saw in the Q&A, somebody had a question here about like, how do you find the white space, and how much attention are you paying to what other people are doing? Like, I think the real talk is that if you're in thought leadership, you have to yourself be a thought leader within the company and then also in the broader ecosystem, right? Because you have to, help people, in sales, see how it is a conversation starter. Like Kelsey, I think that's the perfect framing for it, right? And how it can maybe shorten the sales cycle over time. But if you measure the success of thought leadership in terms of how many dollars it brings in the next quarter, that's a really good way to get just more marketing material, right? And vice versa with brand, helping them understand how this is contributing to the reputation and your position as a leader in the space, right? So that's like within the company, and then externally, like using your network and mining people for other ideas, or, sparks of ideas that then, you can make connections between things. Like you're looking for patterns and trends and things that might buck that trend so that you can anticipate what might be interesting to explore, which
Mhm.
is, I realize, conceptual, but like also as concrete as I can make it, I think.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think one of the other kind of major barriers or challenges that we face in kind of trying to do this, not just from kind of the internal, how are we posing it, what purpose is it serving, but it's tough to be innovative, I think, in this industry for a variety of reasons. There's a lot of regulations about what the product is. It can't just go crazy. And I saw a question in the Q&A as well, kind of related to that, the ketchup example is a brilliant idea of thought leadership. But it's hard in financial services that there's kind of regulations and just limitations on how outside of the box and innovative you could be. I also think that the customer, the end customer, Americans are very stuck in their ways. If you've talked to Americans over time about finances, um, it's hard to get them to change course on things. There's kind of a stubbornness of how they behave that we're all trying to kind of get inroads on, but it's not kind of it's easy task, an easy sell, similar to kind of the earlier comments. So how do you go about being innovative in this kind of space? How do you kind of tackle those challenges of the limits of what is possible in financial services, and then the barriers of kind of how customers and Americans are going to engage with what you're producing?
Well,
So do you want
I
to,
was going
oh, Joe, go ahead.
to add to that with maybe a response to that question from Evan Adams about an example that could be like comparable to the Heinz example. And the one that comes to mind is in the behavioral finance and the behavioral economic space. There was a very groundbreaking kind of research program that Shlomo Bernardsky and Richard Thaler were involved in that ended up uh, into a program, Save More Tomorrow, which was looking at how to overcome human behavior to change outcomes, and of course that led to some very embedded policy kind of decisions that were from that research and that effort. So that probably is one example of like a really out of the box way to make change and use the findings from thought leadership research, and that's purely very academic too. That was a very scientific approach to research, much different than the research that kind of I'm involved in on a more day-to-day basis. But that's probably one example.
Okay. Casey, what do you think in terms of how can we be innovative with thought leadership in financial services?
Well, I'm thinking about maybe a theme that's emerging here, which, you hear in that example that Joe just gave, and it's in the Heinz ketchup bottle example too, which is like people, people maybe didn't know that they needed something in these cases. And how do you, and I think the part of the role of thought leadership is balancing that sort of like we know better inclination with like really listening to people, and like this is a space where you can like go out and really like hear from people directly, which like with so much of this industry being so intermediated, that's otherwise pretty difficult to do. So to be able to get your pulse on what people are thinking, and not just what they're thinking, but why they're making the decisions that they are, with the sort of insight of like, well, we could build a better mousetrap around this, I think is part of the unlock.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Kelsey?
I like everything that's been said, and it's getting me excited about doing more research. But I will say I'm going to take a different approach to this, which is we are all in it, right? We're in the industry. We're surrounded with this data day in and day out, stuff that to us feels old hat, like, is not necessarily gonna feel stale to the people that we're sharing the research with. So something that I've kind of learned and relearned over the years when I've presented research to clients, and especially when you're in the room with them and you can watch the reaction, is we need to repeat ourselves sometimes, or we need to like restate things that have already been said. Because, you know, sometimes we think, oh, that's been asked and answered, that's been overdone. But we're so steeped in it every day. Whereas our clients, you know, for example, someone who's a employer who's making benefits decisions, they may be wearing a lot of hats. They may be looking at a lot of different inputs and doing different things in their day to day. And so they're not seeing this same, and they're not spending all day looking at this type of work. And so when we share something with them, even if it's something that they've heard before, they may need to be reminded of it, and they may still have that aha moment for something that to us feels not as exciting. So I think I mean, I still love the breakthroughs and all of that, but I think there's a place for both, right? There's a place for reinforcing the things that we've already learned and making sure that those messages are getting through to the folks on the other end, as well as taking it a level deeper and saying, okay, now we learned this and here's how we're innovating.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because one of the things that I have encountered, and I've been in this for a number of years, is I've been there, done that, and it's not exciting to me sometimes when I'm thinking about a retirement topic, or, you know, how many times can we talk about expanding access to smaller, you know, through smaller employers. Like, these issues many of them aren't new, and I've managed through them and it dealt with them before, but we're also now working with, and again, I'm putting my PR and communications hat on. We're working with reporters who are younger and are different generation. They haven't thought about this stuff like we have. And we're working with colleagues who, you know, things may seem really, you know, kind of old hat, and we've addressed this, but people that I work with have not, because they're a different generation. So you're right. Like, what's old can be new again. I think the magic is also just making it relevant for how the current time is, and the ways that people want to consume information, and the channels that we have now that we didn't have before, the ways that you package it up in a more compelling way than a 50-page white paper, which many people don't want to read that. They want something that's digestible and it comes through social versus coming in a hard copy white paper. So yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic, because I have to step outside myself too and say, wait a second, this might seem very done, but it's a new group of people are encountering it.
Yeah, I like the connection, because I did want to ask about kind of reception and impact and how do you get things noticed, because if you're going to be a leader with thought leadership, you have to get people to pay attention to it, right? It has to be something that it's getting noticed, even if it's not innovation kind of spreading like wildfire. It has to have eyeballs on it. And so I wonder, when you're thinking about thought leadership, what is key to getting traction with media coverage is one key element. But Kelsey, I think you especially had mentioned the B2B aspect of it, and the audience that you're intending to kind of come across as thought leaders, and to give people kind of interesting insights. What's key to getting traction in this space? Casey, do you want to start, since you were the next person to talk here?
Sure. You know, I think it comes back to something that Joe said at the very top about being humanizing thought leadership, humanizing data. You know, I think back to pretty much any single survey that I've ever run, and the conversations with reporters, and they tend to glom on to stats that are like, well, what are you seeing in this generation, or what are you seeing in this cohort, and why? And it's just, I think it's the way our brains work, like that humanized sort of storytelling treatment of these ideas is what helps them, you know, uh, capture people's engagement.
Mm,
So I think that's a big part of it. You finding
mm,
the story in the data and finding the human nature in all of it.
mm-hmm. What do you
I'll
think, Kelsey?
add, you know, from with any audience, right? You have to, in order for your message to be impactful and for them to be receptive to it, you have to really understand them and what they're interested in, what they're worried about, what are their biggest challenges, where is their focus, and so that can hold true for a B2B audience, and it can be a different aspect of your research for different people. So the better that you can understand the audience, the stronger the impact will be and the stronger the interest will be. And I think that's true as well of, you know, like the media coverage and who you're pitching to and what you're pitching. So I don't do that part of it, but I know my partners in PR have, you know, the relationships, and they understand from working with folks for some time or seeing what else they're publishing, like, ooh, this might be a good angle for us to pitch to this person.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another example of that kind of personalization. And I think one of the sort of exciting things about some of the like AI tools automating certain elements and giving us time to really fine tune our messaging more, so that some of the execution work may be not as tedious, and some of the thinking about how we deliver it and having the time to be able to personalize things more, or hone our messages so that there's more options for people, for us to go out to different people with different needs and different focus areas.
Right. That makes sense.
Okay,
Yeah.
you just answered one of the questions. Nevin had another question about audience. And like I was going to try to, you basically answered it. Like, you do have to think about the different audiences and how you might have to take a different approach. And this is where I lean on my business stakeholders to keep me honest and say, all right, well, I find this interesting for this reason because I'm trying to reach to a reporter and get some broad top of funnel, you know, brand awareness. But if a plan sponsor or an advisor is very interested in the minutia and the technical aspects of plan design, or how do they do something with the participant website so that it like, you do have to get you have to get that strong partnership from a business perspective if you want to make it valuable to different groups. The other part of that, though, which Doug, I was going to answer, like, and we've worked together on this, which I find is the fun part of the research kind of work, is that you're thinking about, and somebody mentioned this, I think Kelsey might have, the end story, like what is it that you want to get to, and then how do you construct or reverse engineer the process so that you can get to that through the questions that you're asking and developing, and we've had fun like coming up with creative ways to do that and looking at what's going on right now in the market, what's happening with people, and how their emotions and their behaviors are playing into things which connect to some of these topics that we're dealing with. And money and finances are very personal, and they're very, you know, they connect to a lot of big moments in life. So how do you find those different ways in social media, relationships, and love, and family dynamics, and generational wealth, and you know, AI and technology, like you said, you can go on and find very interesting ways to get the story that might have started out as, oh, it's just how do you save more for retirement, or how do you do something changes people's behavior so they're taking better action. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It ties to Casey's point too about making it human. This is a very emotional topic, even though kind of on the face of it, this doesn't seem like it should be, but the way it plays out for people often is. Kelsey, I wanted to turn back to kind of your mention of AI and kind of thinking about the future with this. One of the things that we hear a lot about, I don't know how much it's actually true. It's hard to gauge whether people have a good handle on this kind of thing or not, but that there's kind of like short attention span problems now, and just an onslaught of content, right? That there's so much out there that everyone's confronted with it all the time. They already have a short attention span potentially, and it's getting worse. What does the equation look like for thought leadership? How is that kind of changing how you do stuff, or how big of a problem is that?
I think we're still figuring that out, and we might be for a little while, but the way that I think about it now is what I mentioned a few minutes ago, which is that there are going to be we're going to have to change the way that we deliver content to break through more effectively. Like that's going to just become more and more important, because there's going to be an expectation that anything that's delivered is going to be kind of hyper personalized in a way, or at least tailored to your kind of algorithm, right? And so we're getting that from our TVs, and we're getting that in our news, we're getting it on social media. Like it's happening in so many other areas. And so I guess if I'm thinking from the B2B perspective specifically, like how can we tailor the experience, or make it a bit more personalized to the folks that we're sharing with? I think one way that we're already doing that at Lincoln, at least, is we arm some of our relationship managers with thought leadership content, so that then when they're going into like a plan review meeting, they can take their research and share it with the plan sponsor. So they're already having a meeting. This is giving them, some great engaging content. But then because they know personally that plan and their needs and what's going to be of interest to that individual or the individuals in the room. And so they're able to do that personalization in a effective way. But
Mhm.
we as researchers and when developing content can arm them more effectively by giving them a bunch of different storylines, right? So I think that's part of it too.
All right, so personalization, but also maybe personal delivery becomes
Yeah. Like how do you break through? How do you make it meaningful? How do you get someone's attention and keep it?
Mm-hmm. Kelsey, any thoughts about kind of how to navigate this in a short attention span world?
I mean, I think that, cream will always rise to the top in terms of quality content. I think, when I think about what the future of AI will mean for this space, I think about it more from the perspective of like, how do we educate consumers on how to evaluate whether sources are quality and credible or not? Because it's increasingly more difficult to discern. So I think, it sort of ushers in, we think God bless like people working in the financial wellness field like as it is, but like now with AI and fraud and scams like thrown into the mix, like that's a quagmire of things to figure out. And so that's actually where my brain goes first. Just as AI sort of takes over.
Right. Joe, any thoughts about?
Yeah, and it's AI, and it's also just social media too, right? There's so many personalities out there now that are claiming to be experts, or that they are influencers that have knowledge about financial topics. And then who do you believe? And do you go to the traditional brands and companies that are in that space, or are people just starting to look to TikTok or whatever social platform to get their financial information? So totally, like the AI, uh, the risk of fraud and misinformation through that mechanism, but just people that are out there kind of hanging up their own shingle and claiming to be experts where you don't know what their background is or their credibility. So that adds to the challenge as well.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's back to storytelling and making sure that what you're saying is simplified too. Like some of you mentioned going into a plan sponsor or doing a review and getting armed with some really useful information. It also has to be easy to like talk about, and we can overcomplicate things sometimes by we're in the weeds and we know the results of a piece of research, and we're trying to make sure it's super accurate in how we're framing it because there's a compliance perspective to it, and we want to make sure. But at the end of the day, a relationship manager just needs that couple bullets or a sound bite that they can share, and it has to be distilled down into something that's usable. So I think that's a challenge that we deal with, and that I don't think that's going to go away, but it still needs to be easy and workable.
Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of context now. It feels kind of like it's bordering on future, but if we were thinking about questions for this panel, kind of how to discuss this 10 years from now, or 15, 20 years if you really want to start looking into the future, what is this going to look like? What's thought leadership going to look like in the future? Is that driven by AI? That seems like the big change agent for a lot of things, but what else do you see as kind of how the future of thought leadership looks different? Casey, do you want to start on that?
Okay, so I do, and I want to start actually with the way the world maybe looks different in 10, 20, 30 years, and I say this from a demographic perspective and the way people live their lives, right? If people are going to be living longer and longer, right, and we've got 100-year life to work with, the way that they construct their lives and the way that they live their lives is also going to change. And so we're talking not about just like tacking more years onto old age, because like who would like to do that? No, thank you. People will probably be in and out of the workforce more throughout their lives, and maybe they take a break to get more education, and maybe they take a break to just spend time with family and take some time off intermittently throughout the course of their working career. And the reason my brain starts there is because that's a very different math problem to solve for than how do you fund a 30-year retirement, which is already a hard math problem to solve for. And as a result, I think the thought leadership will need to anticipate those trends and how it's like, and it'll probably start like only for very wealthy people, but then like hopefully it get that new map of life type of concept could be democratized more. And what does it mean for lower income workers, and how do you like build new financial products, because that's what's going to be needed alongside new policy to support the way people are going to want to live their lives. And that is a massive thought leadership opportunity in my mind.
Agreed, for sure. Kelsey, what do you think about the future of thought leadership?
Well, I'm really hoping that in 10 years, we'll be talking about the explosion of interest in thought leadership, and our challenge will be how to keep up with just the insatiable demand for insights. But what I think is it's kind of hard to look 10 years out even right now because the pace of change has been so fast. But what I can see on the horizon is really thinking about methodology, because some of the technology that's available now is changing like how we can interact with humans in a more in-depth way at scale. And I've always loved qual because of the nuance of it all, but it's hard to do a thought leadership study that's designed for media coverage and, has the quantitative rigor behind it when you're using qual. So I think qual will expand because again, and it's kind of related to that idea of the personalization and everybody, being different and we're even seeing, like life stages are so different than it used to be 30 years ago. So there's a lot of things changing. And I loved, Casey, what you said about like, let's think about what the world will look like and what people's life will look like and move in that direction, because that kind of thinking is really exciting. And I think there's an appetite for it because there is so much change.
Yeah, it's based on what you're kind of describing too. It feels like the appetite for thought leadership fits in with that world that you're talking about. So maybe both of how you started that statement could be true as well.
Fingers
Joe,
crossed.
any last thoughts about kind of future vision here?
I mean, agree with both Kelsey and Casey and the thinking about what is going to be. I mean, we may not even be talking about retirement. That might not be a word in 10, 15 years or 20 years. I believe really where the work has to be done is the roles that Kelsey and Casey and I have working with the business to make sure that your partners are thinking like that too. Because if you're wanting to get ahead of the curve and think about the trends and anticipating those next big things, you need to have business partners that are also there with you so that you're not misaligned and that you're not too ahead of your time, or you're getting them to think further out than what their immediate need is right now, because there is, different agendas based on where you sit in the company. So having that influence and being able to partner really well with your business stakeholders to get them thinking like that is going to be a big part of how this works in the future. So I guess that's the only additional wrinkle I would add to that.
Yeah, I like it. Okay, I think we've answered most of the questions that came through the Q&A, except there was one that came later here that was about how you make sure your research isn't influenced by your own bias or desire for a particular outcome, which I think we touched on a little bit in terms of being too promotional, but that's a little bit different from promotional for the company that you work for. You may have kind of a bias about what you think the answer is or how it should be asked, or what you're expecting. Any quick thoughts about good ways of trying to overcome your own bias, not just your company's kind of goals or anything like that?
I think we mentioned one of them before, which was don't let your own experience and what you think is interesting get in the way, because what you might find uninteresting, others may still find a lot of novelty and need for. And then the other one is also getting out of your own role. I mean, again, if you think about where we each sit, like I have a very media-focused approach when I think about this stuff, but I have to also remember reporters are not the only audience for good thought leadership. So I would say those are probably ways to not make it too biased and too much about yourself.
I sometimes like to ask a question where, because there's some questions where you're like, I think I know the answer. But some of my favorite questions is like, this is going to be interesting no matter how it turns out, right? Like this question in itself is interesting. And I think when you have questions like that, you're not biased because you're looking forward to the answer too.
Right.
Yeah. And I don't know if somebody from Greenwald planted this question, but I would say, like, just practically speaking, this is where I have found that working with third parties can be so useful, because it does give you that sort of like arm's length gut check on, whether or not something might be sneaking in that you didn't mean to be, and provide some like checks and balances, which is really useful.
Yeah. Well, that comment came in anonymous, so I can't claim, but maybe we're sneaky with it here. Well, this has been wonderful. I've enjoyed this conversation a lot. I hope everyone else that joined us has found this fascinating too. I think it's an interesting idea to kind of turn the lens on kind of what we're doing and talk about that more than we actually do. So thank you to everyone who has joined, and huge thank to Casey, Kelsey, and Joe for your insights today. It's been wonderful. Just as a quick closing note, I want to give a plug to the upcoming Health and Wealth Symposium that we are doing in November as part of the whole 40th anniversary. You can learn more about it on our website, greenwaldresearch.com. Make sure to register soon. I think the hotel block is closing next week. And November, as much as I don't want to admit it, is coming very soon, faster than you think. So take a look at that if you're interested. We'd love to have you. We have some great speakers lined up for that as well. So thank you for your interest and your support, and thanks to my wonderful panel today for joining me today.
Thank you.